Hey guys, this is your host Eric. Today we are going to watch action genre movie called The Marksman. Spoilers ahead, turn on your subtitle, I greatly appreciate your support. Enjoy the video. Miguel is the name of this young man. Miguel lives in Mexico with his mother Rosa, as his father passed away when he was a child. Rosa received a phone call from her cousin Carlos one day while she was cooking at home. He tells Rosa that a drug cartel is looking for him after stealing their large sum of money. As a result, he asked her to take the stolen money and flee Mexico as soon as possible. Carlos was eventually apprehended by the drug cartel, which was led by Mauricio. When Mauricio checks his phone, he discovers that Carlos has just called Rosa, leading him to believe that Carlos has given the cartel money to Rosa. Mauricio intends to go after her right away. Carlos was killed by Mauricio's men after being beaten near the American-Mexican border, specifically in Arizona. Jim Hansen, a retired Marine, is on duty to protect the border from illegal immigrants. Jim noticed some immigrants who were quietly about to cross the border while watching his cattle. He immediately informed other officers of his discovery before following the immigrants. After some time, he came across a Mexican man with a wound on his leg. Because of the wound on his leg, the man was unable to rejoin his group. Jim reported it to another officer over the radio once more. Jim had a bank officer arrive at his house before heading home to collect debts. Jim discovered he had a lot of debt because he had to pay for his late wife's cancer surgery. Worse, if he cannot pay the debt, his home will be taken away. He had no money at the time, so he had to beg the debt collector for a few more weeks to pay off his debt. Jim went to a cattle farmer in the afternoon to sell some of his cows. However, the cattle farmer offered his cow for a low price. Jim was perplexed because, despite selling all of his cows, he still lacked the funds to pay off his debt. Jim went to the bar that evening to unwind for a while. There he meets his border police officer's stepdaughter, Sarah. Jim then told her about his debt problems, which could lead to him losing his house that night. Jim had consumed so much alcohol that Sarah had to drive him home. Rosa and Miguel are being pursued by a cartel the next day at the Mexican-American border. They were attempting to enter America through a gap in the iron fence when they met Jim, who was passing by Rosa, who is now an illegal immigrant. Jim begs her not to report her and Miguel to the border patrol, but not for long. When Mauricio and his gang arrived, he immediately asked Jim to hand over Rosa and Miguel, knowing that their lives were in danger. Jim eventually decides to protect them. That clearly irritated Mauricio, and a gunfight erupted between Jim and the cartel. Jim manages to shoot one of Mauricio's men with his rifle before fleeing in a pickup with Rosa and Miguel, but Mauricio refused to let them flee. He tried to catch up to Jim, but Jim was able to escape after losing his quarry. Mauricio becomes even angrier when he learns that his brother, Jim Shot, has died from here. Mauricio began to harbor resentment toward Jim Hansen. Jim, on the other hand, discovers Rosa has been shot. Her gunshot wound was severe enough to endanger her life. Rosa then handed Jim a bag and her family's address in Chicago, as if realizing her life was in danger, pleading with him to take Miguel to his grandmother. Rosa breathed her last after having said everything. When the medical and police officers arrived at the crime scene that evening, Sarah informed Jim that Miguel would be taken to the police station and handed over to his family. The next day, Jim, accompanied by his dog Jackson, saw a car belonging to a drug cartel in the border office parking lot, but he didn't seem bothered by it. After that, Jim opened the bag Rosa had given him and discovered that it contained a large sum of money, despite the fact that he was in debt. Jim jumped in his car and drove to the bank to pay off all of his debts. But when he saw Rosa's bloodstain on the bag, his apathy began to crumble. He remembered being assigned the responsibility of looking after Miguel, so he returned to the border office. Jim discovers that Miguel will be handed over to his family, who are waiting outside, but he quickly realizes that the family in question is Mauricio's. So, while the office clerk was on the phone, Jim went to Miguel and secretly took him away. Meanwhile, Mauricio stands in the parking lot, watching Jim leave. He decided to enter American territory in order to kill them and reclaim his money. Jim returned home moments later to retrieve some of his clothes and weapons. Then he went straight to Chicago with Miguel. At the same time, Mauricio and his group began to cross the border into America. The Border Patrol officers appear to be well aware of the atrocities committed by Mexican drug cartels. He made it simple for Mauricio and his gang to enter America. Mauricio then went straight to Jim's house. He enters the house and discovers Jim's credit card documents in the form of a Marine Award badge, indicating that Jim is not your average person. Mauricio then took the badge and set Jim's house on fire. To find Jim's credit card information, Mauricio decides to meet with a cartel member in America. Jim, on the other hand, had stopped at a gas station to refuel and purchase a map to help him navigate his journey to Chicago. Unfortunately, he was unaware that Mauricio had tracked him down using the credit card he used at the gas station. Mauricio and his gang wasted no time in heading straight for the gas station. When they arrived, Maurizio asked the shop assistant where Jim was going, but the shop assistant was unaware, and she objected to Maurizio inspecting the CCTV footage, irritated by her behavior. Maurizio finally kills her so he can examine the video footage. According to the video footage, Jim can be seen traveling east. Meanwhile, Jim was stopped by police, who demanded that he show his driver's license and identity card. Jim admitted to carrying a firearm with an official certificate of ownership. Instead, the police wanted to take his gun. He also desired to speak with Miguel. Jim reluctantly followed the officer into his car, but it didn't take long for Jim to notice the cop was on the phone with someone. He didn't say anything to Miguel. Jim confronted the cop after becoming suspicious, and his suspicions were confirmed. The cartel has paid the cops to locate Miguel. Jim then knocks the police officer out without giving him a chance. Jim then instructs Miguel to flee before the cartels arrive. And sure enough, not long after, Maurizio arrived and interrogated the cop about Jim and Miguel's whereabouts, but the cop didn't know because they left while he was unconscious. Upon hearing this, Maurizio became enraged and shot the police officer. Unfortunately, Maurizio discovered Jim's map before leaving. Jim and Miguel spend the night in a motel and fall asleep. Around 2 a.m., Jim awoke from his sleep and decided to spend the night with Jackson. But as he was leaving the room, he noticed Maurizio and his group. In the hotel reception area, Jim immediately awoke Miguel and called the police to report a robbery. He then led Miguel away into the bushes. Soon after, Maurizio and his group broke into Jim's room and discovered him missing. They searched the hotel for him before an enraged Maurizio screams and threatens to kill Jim. After Maurizio has left, Jim instructs Miguel to get in the car while he returns to the hotel in search of Jackson. However, the timing was off because Jim discovered Jackson barking at Maurizio, and the dog was shot dead right in front of Jim's eyes, breaking his heart. Jim and Miguel bury Jackson returned to the farm the next day. They then went to a church where Miguel wanted to pray for his late mother. After the prayer, the priest approached Jim and asked if Miguel was his grandson. Jim replied truthfully, stating that he was trusted to look after Miguel and had no relation to him at all. Jim then called Sarah, who demanded that he return Miguel to the police, but he refused because he was determined to take Miguel to his family in Chicago. They then continued on their journey. Miguel had previously marked the city of Chicago with a red marker on the map. When Maurizio realized where Jim was going, he immediately dispatched a cartel in Chicago to intercept him on the freeway. The journey had left me exhausted. Jim and Miguel take a break beneath the bridge, lighting a fire to keep warm. To keep the fire going, they burned the cartel's money. They continued on their journey and arrived in the Chicago area the next day. However, while crossing the highway, Jim noticed a cartel group on the flyover watching him. Maurizio and his men, on the other hand, know exactly where Jim is. They pursued and intercepted him from the front. Fortunately, Jim was able to dodge once more and drive Maurizio's car into the bushes. Jim immediately accelerated away from Maurizio, forcing Maurizio and his men to turn around and pursue him. Jim chose to stop on his way down the slope to shoot the pursuer cars with his rifle. Jim, a former Marine sniper, shoots Mauricio's driver, causing his car to overturn on the side of the road. Maurizio and the 2 remaining members then exited the vehicle. Jim, on the other hand, rushed Miguel to safety. They took refuge in a nearby fodder shed. Jim then aimed with pinpoint accuracy from behind the window at the adversary. He was able to assassinate one of Mauricio's men. There are now only 2 left. He then went to the warehouse's side to take aim at Mauricio's men. The strategy worked. Only Mauricio remains. Mauricio, on the other hand, managed to sneak into the warehouse and apprehend Miguel. Mauricio then coerces Miguel into shooting Jim. But, as it turned out, Miguel was the smarter of the 2. He managed to empty the cartridges before the gun went off, allowing Jim to lunge at Mauricio, resulting in a fight between the 2. Miguel wishes to assist Jim. He then pulled out his gun and aimed it at Moric. Instead of pleading for mercy, Mauricio challenges Miguel to a gunfight. Jim didn't want Miguel to be a murderer, so he quickly grabbed the gun and shot Mauricio. Jim then gave Mauricio 2 options: die at his hands or by his own hand. With their pursuers now dead, Mauricio chose the second option. He returned his gaze, but Jim had vanished. At the end of the film, Jim staggers up the bus, then sits in the passenger seat clutching his stabbed stomach from the fight with Moric. He slowly closed his eyes and leaned back, realizing he was seriously injured. This final scene makes us wonder if Jim has died. We really appreciate you watching. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel with the notification bell because it is really important for us. Thank you.